We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore at all. My son sent that text at 2:14 on a snowy Thursday afternoon while I was standing in the cereal aisle at King Soopers holding a box of Cinnamon Oats squares my granddaughter Lily loved eating whenever she stayed at my house. I remember staring at the message for several seconds because at first I honestly thought I had read it wrong. Ethan had always been brief over text. Busy people are like that. But this felt different. Cold. Final. Like a door locking from the inside. Around me, shopping carts rattled over the tile floor while Christmas music played softly through the speakers overhead. A little boy somewhere behind me was begging his mother for candy. Life kept moving as if nothing had happened while my entire world quietly shifted beneath my feet. I read the message again. We need space from you. Not I. We. That was the word that hurt the most. Because I already knew whose voice lived inside that sentence. Vanessa. My daughter-in-law had mastered the art of making cruelty sound reasonable. She never yelled, never insulted anyone directly. She spoke in soft tones about boundaries and emotional energy and protecting peace. But somehow, every conversation ended with me standing farther away from my own family. My fingers tightened around the cereal box. I noticed my reflection in the freezer door across from me. A 68-year-old woman in a beige winter coat staring at her phone like she'd just received news from a hospital. My cart was full of things for Ethan's family. Tomato soup Lily liked after school. Graham crackers for Noah. A small container of peppermint ice cream because Vanessa once mentioned it reminded her of childhood Christmases in Vermont. I had spent over $100 that afternoon buying groceries for people who apparently no longer wanted me in their lives. A second message appeared. Please respect our boundaries. Boundaries. That word again. Modern families love that word. It sounded healthy and mature even when used like a weapon. I slowly placed the cereal box back onto the shelf. My hands felt strangely calm. Not shaky. Not angry. Just tired. The kind of tired that settles deep into your bones after years of trying too hard to be loved correctly. I pushed my cart toward the front of the store, then stopped near the automatic doors. Snow swirled across the parking lot in soft white waves. I looked down at the groceries one last time before quietly walking away from the cart entirely. I left everything there. The soup, the crackers, the peppermint ice cream. All of it. Outside, the cold Colorado air hit my face hard enough to make my eyes water. Or maybe I was already close to crying. I couldn't tell anymore. I sat inside my Subaru for several minutes without turning the engine on. The windshield slowly collected snow while I stared at Ethan's text glowing against the dark screen. My son, the little boy who used to climb into bed beside me after thunderstorms because he was scared of the lightning. The teenager who cried in my arms after his first heartbreak junior year. The young man I worked double shifts for so he could finish college without drowning in debt. And now apparently I was someone he needed protection from. I wanted to call him immediately. Every motherly instinct inside me screamed to fix things before they became permanent. I almost typed, "Honey, did I do something wrong?" But another part of me already knew how that conversation would go. Vanessa would explain that this decision came from a place of love. Ethan would sound uncomfortable but distant. And somehow, by the end of it, I would apologize for caring too much. Again, snowflakes melted against the windshield in crooked little trails while memories began replaying in my head. Birthday dinners canceled at the last minute. School plays I somehow wasn't told about until afterward. Family vacation photos posted online while I sat alone at home, believing everyone was simply busy that weekend. At the time, I told myself not to be dramatic. Families grow apart sometimes. Children get older. Lives become complicated. But sitting there in that freezing parking lot, I finally allowed myself to see the pattern clearly. This hadn't happened overnight. I had been disappearing slowly for years. My phone buzzed one final time. Another text from Ethan. "We appreciate you understanding." I let out a quiet laugh then. Not because anything was funny, but because the message sounded so rehearsed. So carefully written. Like something copied from a therapy podcast. I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat and started the engine. Then I reached toward my keychain hanging from the ignition. Alongside my house key and car key was a small silver key Ethan had given me 8 years earlier when Lily was born. "So you'll always feel welcome," he'd said back then with that warm smile I barely recognized anymore. I held the little silver key between my fingers for a long moment before unclipping it from the ring and setting it gently inside the center console. The sound it made was tiny, barely audible, but somehow it felt louder than anything else that had happened that day. The drive home felt longer than usual that afternoon. Denver traffic crawled slowly beneath gray winter skies, while dirty snow piled along the edges of the road like frozen waves. I kept both hands tight on the steering wheel and focused on the taillights ahead of me, because the moment I allowed my mind to drift, memories started surfacing one after another. Looking back now, I realized none of this had truly begun with that text message. Families do not disappear all at once. They fade in pieces so small you convince yourself not to notice them. After my husband Walter passed away 2 years earlier, Sundays became the center of my week. It was a routine that made the quiet house feel less empty. Every Sunday morning, I would wake up early, brew coffee in the same chipped blue mug Walter used for 15 years, and begin preparing dinner for Ethan and his family. Pot roast in the winter, lemon herb chicken in the summer, homemade rolls whenever Lily requested them. I used to love hearing the sound of little feet running through the hallway again. The laughter, the noise, the feeling that the house still mattered to someone besides me. In the beginning, they came almost every weekend. Vanessa brought wine. Ethan helped clear dishes afterward. Lily used to curl up beside me on the couch with a blanket while Noah lined toy trucks across my coffee table. Those evenings kept me alive after Walter died. People talk about grief like it arrives loudly, but sometimes it is just silence stretching across rooms that used to hold another person's voice. Then slowly, things began changing in ways that felt too minor to question. One Sunday, Vanessa texted saying the children were tired from soccer practice. The next week, Ethan had work deadlines. Another weekend, they were visiting friends in Boulder. At first, I believed every excuse because that is what mothers do. We explain away disappointment before it fully forms. But over time, the empty Sundays started multiplying. I would spend hours cooking meals that never left the oven. I still set the dining table out of habit sometimes. For plates, cloth napkins, the good serving bowl Walter bought during our anniversary trip to Santa Fe. Then around 4 o'clock, my phone would buzz with another last-minute cancellation. Crazy day over here. The kids are exhausted. Rain checks soon. Always polite. Always distant. I never complained. I told myself not to become one of those mothers who guilt their children for having lives. Vanessa especially seemed sensitive about anything she called emotional pressure. She liked using phrases that sounded calm and reasonable while somehow making me feel ashamed for loving too openly. We are trying to build healthy boundaries. The kids need consistency at home. We are protecting our peace this season. I remember one afternoon at Lily's dance recital when I arrived 15 minutes early and realized everyone was already seated together near the front. Vanessa waved politely from across the auditorium, but never saved me a seat. I ended up alone 3 rows behind strangers while watching my granddaughter perform under bright stage lights. During intermission, I overheard another mother asking Vanessa if I was Ethan's aunt. Vanessa laughed softly before replying, "No, that is his mom. She likes giving us space these days." Giving them space. I sat there holding my paper cup of watered-down coffee wondering when exactly that story had been created. Another time, I mailed birthday gifts to the children because Vanessa said they were keeping Noah's party small. Later that night, Lily accidentally posted photos online from a trampoline park packed with relatives, neighbors, and school friends. Everyone smiling beneath strings of blue balloons. Everyone except me. The hardest part was not the exclusion itself. It was the confusion. Every small moment carried just enough deniability to make me question my own instincts. Maybe I really was too sensitive. Maybe grief had made me cling too tightly after Walter died. Maybe modern families simply operated differently now. By the time I pulled into my driveway that evening, daylight was already fading behind the mountains. My little brick house sat quiet beneath a thin layer of snow. Walter used to hang Christmas lights along the gutters every December, no matter how cold it got outside. 2 years later, the hooks still remained empty. I sat in the car for another minute before gathering my purse. The silence inside the house greeted me immediately. No television. No children laughing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock above the kitchen doorway. I removed my coat slowly and placed my keys onto the counter. The empty spot where Ethan's silver key once hung on my keychain felt strangely heavy. Then I noticed something sitting near the sink. A Christmas card Lily had made for me the year before. Glitter glue. Crooked snowflakes. Her careful handwriting across the front. Grandma Helen makes everything feel warm. I stood there staring at those words for a long time because for the first time in months, maybe years, I finally allowed myself to admit something I had been avoiding. Warmth was only welcome when it was convenient. And somewhere along the way, I had become inconvenient. The next morning, I woke up at 5:17 the way I always did, even though there was nowhere I needed to be anymore. For a few seconds, I lay still beneath the heavy quilt Walter and I bought during a road trip through Wyoming nearly 20 years earlier. Snow pressed softly against the bedroom windows while pale blue dawn light crept across the ceiling. My first instinct was to reach for my phone on the nightstand and check whether Ethan had sent another message during the night. Maybe an apology, maybe clarification, something softer than what he had written before. But the screen stayed dark except for weather alerts warning about icy roads across Denver County. I placed the phone back down carefully and stared toward Walter's side of the bed. His reading glasses still sat inside the top drawer of his nightstand because I could never quite bring myself to move them. Grief changes shape over time. In the beginning, it crashes through your life like a storm. Later, it becomes quieter, smaller. A cup left untouched in the cabinet. A jacket still hanging near the door. The absence becomes part of the furniture. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen sink watching snow collect along the fence line outside. Across the yard, the Henderson's golden retriever bounded happily through the fresh powder while Christmas lights blinked from neighboring rooftops. Everything looked peaceful from a distance. That was the strange thing about loneliness. Most of it happens invisibly. Around 8 o'clock, I opened Facebook out of habit. The first photo that appeared stopped me cold. Vanessa had posted pictures from the previous evening. Ethan stood beside her inside a warmly lit restaurant downtown, one arm around Lily while Noah grinned over a plate of pizza bigger than his face. Everyone looked relaxed, happy. The caption read, "Protecting our peace this holiday season." I stared at those words longer than I should have. Protecting our peace. As if I had been some kind of threat sitting quietly outside the walls of their perfect little family. Hundreds of people liked the post. Several comments praised Vanessa for doing what is best for the children. One woman wrote, "Boundaries are so important with toxic relatives." Vanessa responded with a small heart emoji. Toxic relatives. I felt my stomach tighten. She had never used my name directly. She did not need to. The implication hung there plainly enough for everyone to understand. Suddenly memories began resurfacing with painful clarity. Last spring, Lily called me crying after a fight with a friend at school. We talked for nearly an hour while she sat hidden inside her bedroom closet because she said it felt safer there. 2 days later, Vanessa called and politely explained that she preferred the children process emotions within the immediate household first. Another time, I surprised Noah with tickets to a Colorado Rockies game for his birthday. Ethan thanked me warmly on the phone, but Vanessa later sent a long text about respecting parental routines and avoiding overstimulating outings. Every act of love eventually became evidence that I was somehow overstepping. I closed the app and set my phone face down on the kitchen table. The coffee beside me had already gone cold. Around noon, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. My neighbor Diane stood outside bundled in a red scarf with a plate of gingerbread cookies balanced carefully in mittened hands. Diane was one of those women who always seemed to know more than she admitted. She had lived across the street nearly 15 years and noticed everything from improperly sorted recycling bins to whose children visited on holidays. "I baked too many again," she said with a tired smile as I invited her inside. We sat together in the living room while snow drifted softly outside the windows. For a while we talked about ordinary things. Heating bills, grocery prices, the Broncos disappointing everyone yet again. Then Diane grew quieter. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug before finally speaking. "I ran into Vanessa at Target a few weeks ago," she said carefully. Something inside me tightened immediately. "Oh." Diane hesitated. "She mentioned you were taking some time away from the family. Said things had become emotionally difficult lately." I stared at her. Emotionally difficult? Diane nodded awkwardly. I did not think much of it at the time, but she made it sound like the children needed distance for their well-being. Well-being. Another one of those clean modern words that sounded compassionate while quietly destroying someone's reputation. I suddenly understood something that had never fully made sense before. Vanessa had not only been pushing me out privately, she had been rewriting the story publicly too. Carefully. slowly, making my absence appear necessary instead of cruel. Diane reached over and touched my hand gently. For what it is worth, Helen, none of it sounded right to me. I managed a small smile, but after she left, I sat alone for a very long time thinking about how thoroughly a person could disappear while still technically being alive. By evening, the snow had stopped completely. I walked through the quiet house, turning on lamps one by one as darkness settled outside. In the hallway near the stairs hung dozens of framed family photographs collected over 40 years. Ethan at 6 years old holding a fishing pole beside Walter. Lily asleep on my chest as a newborn. Christmas mornings. Graduation ceremonies. Summer barbecues. Proof that once upon a time I had belonged somewhere. I paused in front of one photo taken 5 years earlier during Thanksgiving dinner. Vanessa stood beside Ethan, smiling directly into the camera while her hand rested lightly against his shoulder. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Looking at it now, I noticed something different. Not warmth, not love, control. Quiet and polished, and almost impossible to describe unless you had lived inside it long enough to recognize the shape. That night, I could not sleep no matter how hard I tried. The house creaked softly around me the way old houses always do during winter, settling deeper into the cold after midnight. Around 1 in the morning, I gave up completely, wrapped Walter's old gray cardigan around my shoulders, and walked downstairs barefoot. The kitchen tiles felt icy beneath my feet, while moonlight spilled faintly across the counters. I stood there for a moment staring at the refrigerator covered with magnets, school drawings, and faded family snapshots collected over decades. So much of motherhood lives inside small forgotten things. Finger paintings, report cards, handwritten grocery lists tucked into drawers. Proof that you spent most of your life building memories nobody notices until you are gone. I opened the freezer and found the lasagna I had prepared the previous weekend before everything happened. Enough food to feed 6 people. I remembered layering the ricotta carefully because Noah hated when it clumped unevenly. I remembered buying the expensive Italian sausage Ethan liked because he once joked nobody cooked comfort food like I did. The pan still sat untouched beneath a layer of frost. I closed the freezer quietly and leaned against the counter, feeling something strange settle inside me. Not heartbreak exactly. Clarity. There is a moment when pain becomes too familiar to surprise you anymore. A moment when you stop asking why someone hurt you and start realizing how long you ignored the signs because love made you hopeful. I carried a mug of tea into the living room and sat beside the darkened Christmas tree near the window. Walter used to insist on decorating the tree the day after Thanksgiving every single year, no matter how busy life became. A house should look alive in December, he always said. After he died, I almost stopped decorating completely. But Lily cried the first Christmas without him because she said Grandpa would be sad if the lights disappeared. So I kept doing it. For her. Funny how women spend years maintaining traditions for people who eventually forget who created them in the first place. Around 2 o'clock, I found myself opening old photo albums stacked inside the cabinet beneath the television. One picture slipped loose and landed face up across my lap. Ethan at 19 years old standing beside his dorm room bed at Colorado State University. He looked exhausted and skinny in the photo because during those years he worked late shifts at a grocery store while carrying a full class schedule. What nobody else knew was that I secretly mailed him grocery money every month after Walter's construction business slowed down during the recession. Sometimes $50. Sometimes $200 when I could manage overtime hours at the dental office. I skipped plenty of things back then without ever mentioning it aloud. New winter boots. Doctor appointments. A root canal I delayed nearly 3 years because Ethan needed textbooks more than I needed comfort. Mothers do not usually keep score. We just quietly rearrange our own lives around the people we love and hope someday they understand what it cost. I remembered one winter especially clearly. Ethan called me from Fort Collins during a snowstorm because his apartment heating had broken overnight. He tried pretending everything was fine, but I could hear his teeth chattering through the phone. Walter was already asleep upstairs after working 14 hours in freezing temperatures, but I climbed into the car immediately and drove nearly 70 miles through snow-packed roads with extra blankets, soup, and a portable space heater squeezed into the back seat. I arrived around 1:30 in the morning. Ethan opened the apartment door wrapped in 2 hoodies, looking embarrassed and relieved all at once. "Mom, you did not have to come all the way out here," he said. But I did. Because that is what mothers do. We come anyway, even when nobody asks us to. Especially then. I sat quietly turning pages while memories rose and disappeared like smoke. Ethan laughing beside Walter during fishing trips. Ethan dancing badly with Lily in my kitchen while pancakes burned on the stove. Ethan crying at his father's funeral with his face buried against my shoulder like he was still 12 years old instead of nearly 40. Somewhere between those moments and now, something changed. Or maybe someone slowly taught him that love from a parent was something burdensome instead of sacred. I thought about Vanessa again. The first time we met, she arrived at Thanksgiving dinner carrying an expensive bottle of wine and complimented my table setting before quietly rearranging the serving dishes because she said the layout felt crowded. At the time, I laughed it off. Vanessa always had opinions about how things should look, sound, or feel. She corrected people gently but constantly. She once reorganized my pantry while helping after Christmas because she said systems reduce stress. Another time, she replaced the homemade cookies I baked for Lily's school fundraiser with store-bought organic ones because they looked more polished. Small things. Harmless things. Except over time, I realized every adjustment carried the same message beneath it. The way I loved people was somehow wrong. Too emotional. Too old-fashioned. Too much. Outside the windows, the neighborhood sat silent beneath fresh snow while Christmas lights blinked across dark rooftops. I looked down at the old photograph still resting in my lap and traced Ethan's younger face carefully with my fingertips. Then for the first time since receiving those messages, I allowed myself to wonder something I had been too afraid to ask before. What if they had not only pushed me away? What if little by little, they had taught my own son to see me as someone worth pushing away from? 3 days passed without a single message from Ethan. No phone calls. No accidental texts meant for someone else. Nothing. The silence itself became strangely physical inside the house, like another piece of furniture sitting quietly in every room. On Sunday morning, I still woke up early out of habit. For nearly 2 decades, Sundays had meant grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, preparing for family dinner. My body still followed the routine, even though my mind knew nobody was coming anymore. I stood in the kitchen staring at the empty countertop where I usually rolled out pie dough or arranged serving dishes before finally putting the kettle on for tea instead. Outside, the snow had started melting along the sidewalks, leaving behind dirty gray slush that clung to the edges of the street. Denver winters always looked tired by January. Around noon, I decided to clean the upstairs hallway closet because sometimes grief feels easier when your hands stay busy. I sorted through old blankets, board games the children used to play with, and boxes filled with Christmas decorations wrapped carefully in newspaper. Near the back shelf, I found a small pink mitten Lily had lost years earlier during a sledding trip. Tiny, soft, still carrying a faint smell of cedar from the closet. I sat down on the carpet holding that mitten far longer than made sense. People talk about heartbreak like it arrives in dramatic moments, but often it is just sitting alone on the floor holding evidence that someone once needed you. My phone rang unexpectedly around 2 in the afternoon. For one foolish second, my heart leaped thinking it might be Ethan. Instead, it was Melissa Porter, one of Lily's former elementary school teachers. I had not spoken to her in over a year. "Helen," she said warmly, "I hope I am not bothering you." "Not at all," I replied, surprised. Melissa hesitated before continuing. "I actually wanted to check on you. I ran into Vanessa at a school fundraiser recently, and she mentioned things have been difficult with your family." There was that careful language again. Difficult. As if estrangement was just an unfortunate scheduling conflict. I leaned quietly against the kitchen counter while Melissa continued speaking. "I hope this is not inappropriate, but honestly, I was confused. You were always so involved with the children. Lily used to talk about you constantly at school." I swallowed hard. "Thank you for saying that." Another small pause followed before Melissa lowered her voice slightly. "Vanessa implied the distance was necessary because you were having emotional struggles after your husband passed. She made it sound like the children needed stability." Stability. I almost laughed hearing the word aloud. Walter and I spent 40 years building stability brick by brick. We paid every bill on time. We attended every school event. We raised Ethan in a home where dinner happened at the same table every evening no matter how tired we were. Stability was the one thing I had given my family consistently my entire life. Yet somehow the story being told about me now painted me as fragile and emotionally unsafe. Melissa cleared her throat gently. I just wanted you to know that never matched the person I knew. After we hung up, I remained standing there staring out the kitchen window while something cold settled inside my chest. Not sadness this time. Understanding. Vanessa had not simply pushed me away privately. She had been building a version of me for other people to believe. Quietly, patiently, like someone laying railroad tracks one careful piece at a time. Suddenly, so many moments made sense. The neighbors growing awkward during conversations about family gatherings. Parents from Lily's school no longer inviting me to volunteer events. Even Ethan himself beginning to speak to me differently over the past 2 years, carefully choosing words the way people do around unstable strangers. I walked slowly into the living room and sat down in Walter's old recliner. Across from me stood the bookshelf Ethan built in high school woodshop class. Crooked corners, uneven stain. Walter had proudly displayed it in the living room anyway, because he believed effort mattered more than perfection. My eyes drifted toward a framed photo sitting beside the lamp. Ethan at 12 years old smiling proudly after winning second place at a regional science fair. His front tooth slightly chipped from a bicycle accident that summer. I remembered staying awake until 2 in the morning helping him glue tiny cardboard planets onto a painted solar system display because he was terrified of disappointing his teacher. "You always make things better, Mom," he told me afterward while hugging me tightly. I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering the warmth of that little boy's arms around my neck. Then another memory surfaced unexpectedly. About 6 months earlier, Lily accidentally called me from Vanessa's phone while trying to play a game. I answered immediately, thrilled to hear her voice. But before Lily could say more than hello, Vanessa took the phone back. I still remembered her cheerful tone. "Oops, pocket dial," she laughed lightly. Then softer, almost teasing, she added, "We are trying not to overdo phone time right now. You know how attached children can get." Attached. The word hit differently now. Everything did. I stood up slowly and walked toward the front hallway mirror near the coat rack. For a long moment, I simply looked at myself. Gray hair falling loosely around my shoulders. Tired blue eyes. A woman nearly 70 years old standing alone inside a quiet house wondering when exactly her love became something people needed protection from. Then for the first time since all this began, another thought entered my mind. Small at first, barely noticeable, but steady. Maybe the problem was not that I loved too much. Maybe the problem was that I kept begging to stay where I was no longer respected. The decision happened quietly 3 weeks later while I was standing in line at the post office mailing Lily and Noah their Valentine's Day cards. I had spent an hour choosing them. Carefully the night before. One covered in cartoon puppies for Noah. Pink glitter hearts for Lily because she still loved anything sparkly despite insisting she was too grown up for childish things now. I addressed the envelopes neatly in my best handwriting and included $20 bills inside each card the way my mother used to do for me. Small traditions survive inside families longer than people realize. Or at least they are supposed to. The woman working the front counter weighed the envelopes before pausing awkwardly. "I think these were returned already," she said while turning them over gently. I frowned in confusion. Across both envelopes sat a bright yellow sticker stamped in black ink. "Return to sender. Recipient unavailable." For several seconds, I simply stared at the labels without fully understanding them. Ethan had not moved. The children had not changed schools. Their house still stood exactly where it always had in Highlands Ranch with the blue shutters Vanessa insisted made the place look more East Coast. My hands suddenly felt cold despite the overheated little post office packed with people shipping packages before the holiday weekend. "There must be some mistake," I said quietly. The woman gave me an apologetic smile. "Sometimes forwarding requests or blocked deliveries cause issues." "Blocked deliveries?" I thanked her politely, took the envelopes back, and walked outside into sharp February wind carrying those unopened cards inside my purse like tiny pieces of broken glass. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes without turning the engine on. Around me, people hurried through parking lots balancing coffee cups and grocery bags while ordinary life continued moving forward. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rang noon across the cold Denver air. I looked down at the 2 envelopes resting in my lap and finally understood something painful but freeing all at once. They were not waiting for me to fade naturally from their lives anymore. They were actively erasing me. I drove home slowly that afternoon, and for the first time since Walter died, the house no longer felt comforting. It felt heavy. Every room carried the weight of waiting. Waiting for calls. Waiting for visits. Waiting for invitations that never arrived. Even the furniture seemed arranged around the possibility of people who no longer came. I walked upstairs and opened the closet in the guest bedroom where dozens of plastic storage bins held years of family memories. Halloween costumes. Easter baskets. Handmade Christmas ornaments with crooked glitter fingerprints from when Ethan was little. I sat cross-legged on the carpet, pulling things out one by one, while dust floated softly through pale afternoon sunlight. There were entire boxes filled with evidence that I had spent my whole life loving people completely. Yet somehow none of it protected me from becoming disposable. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. My heart jumped before I even checked the screen. But it was not Ethan. It was a realtor named Susan Mitchell returning an online inquiry I barely remembered filling out 2 nights earlier after another sleepless evening. "Mrs. Carter?" she asked warmly. "I saw you were interested in discussing downsizing options." Downsizing. The word sounded strange and enormous at the same time. Walter and I bought this house when Ethan was 8 years old. Back then the neighborhood had barely any trees. We planted the maple in the front yard ourselves during Ethan's first summer break here. Every inch of the house carried fingerprints from our lives. Pencil marks inside the pantry tracking Ethan's height each birthday. A tiny burn mark on the patio from Walter dropping barbecue tongs during a Broncos game. The upstairs hallway where Lily used to slide in socks pretending she was ice skating. Leaving suddenly felt impossible, but staying had started feeling worse. Susan's voice remained calm and practical while we spoke. "The market is still strong right now," she explained. "A lot of people your age are relocating closer to smaller communities or coastal towns." Coastal towns. Something about those words lingered in my mind after we hung up. That evening I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, searching places I had only vaguely dreamed about before. Small towns in Maine, New Hampshire, Oregon, quiet places near bookstores and coffee shops and oceans instead of cul-de-sacs filled with memories. I found photos of a tiny seaside town in Maine where snow-covered fishing boats lined the harbor beneath strings of winter lights. There was a little bookstore near Main Street that hosted poetry nights on Thursdays. A bakery famous for blueberry muffins. Sidewalks overlooking gray Atlantic water stretching endlessly toward the horizon. I stared at those pictures far longer than necessary. The idea felt reckless at first. Almost selfish. Mothers are trained to stay available forever. Close enough to help. Close enough to return whenever needed. But sitting there alone beneath the kitchen light, while the returned Valentine cards rested unopened beside me, another thought slowly replaced the guilt. Maybe distance did not only belong to them anymore. Maybe I was allowed to stop standing outside locked doors waiting for someone to remember I belonged inside. I closed the laptop quietly and looked around the kitchen one long final time. The copper pans hanging above the stove. Walter's old coffee mug drying beside the sink. The silence pressing softly against the walls. Then I reached for my phone, opened my contacts, and without giving myself time to reconsider, I deleted Ethan's address completely. By March, the for sale sign stood quietly in my front yard beneath melting patches of snow. Susan worked quickly once I finally committed. Professional photographs were taken on a cloudy Tuesday morning while I wandered from room to room pretending not to notice strangers discussing the square footage of the home where I had spent most of my adult life. "The natural light in here is beautiful," one photographer said while adjusting his camera near the dining room window. I almost told him the light looked prettier at Christmas when Walter hung wreaths outside and the children crowded around the table arguing over who got the last dinner roll. But instead I simply nodded and stepped aside. Buyers began touring the house within days. Young couples mostly. Families pushing strollers across hardwood floors while discussing renovations in cheerful voices. One woman stood in the upstairs hallway talking about converting Ethan's old bedroom into a home office. I listened politely from the kitchen while something inside me detached itself quietly from the walls around me. The strange thing was that once the decision became real, the grief shifted too. I expected panic, regret. Instead, I mostly felt lighter. For the first time in years, I was no longer arranging my entire existence around the possibility of being needed. I stopped checking my phone every hour. I stopped rereading old messages looking for hidden warmth between cold sentences. Even my body felt different somehow. Less tense. Less watchful. One afternoon, while packing books into cardboard boxes, I found an old voicemail Ethan left nearly 10 years earlier after Lily was born. His voice sounded younger then. Softer. "Mom, I do not know what we would do without you," he said through crackling speaker static. "Seriously, you are the glue holding everything together." I sat there on the living room floor holding the phone tightly, while moving boxes surrounded me like small, unfinished walls. Funny how easily people praise your sacrifices while they still benefit from them. A week later, the house officially sold to a couple relocating from Phoenix. Closing was scheduled for late April. Susan congratulated me over lunch at a little cafe downtown, while snowmelt dripped steadily from awnings outside. "Fresh starts can be good," she said kindly. I smiled and stirred cream into my coffee without answering immediately. Fresh start. The phrase sounded almost too optimistic for someone my age. But maybe peace did not belong only to young people beginning new lives. Maybe older women deserved it too. That evening, I booked a one-way flight to Portland, Maine. My hands trembled slightly while entering payment information online because the decision suddenly felt enormous once money became involved. Real. Permanent. I rented a small furnished cottage outside a coastal town called Camden for 3 months while figuring out what came next. The cottage photos showed pale blue shutters, a stone walkway dusted with salt air, and windows overlooking the harbor. Small. Quiet. Nobody there knew me as Ethan's mother or Vanessa's. Problem or the grandmother who needed boundaries. I slept better that night than I had in months. Meanwhile, somewhere hundreds of miles away, cracks had apparently started forming inside Ethan's carefully managed world. I would not learn the full story until much later, but it began with something small. It always does. One evening, while helping Lily with homework at the kitchen table, Ethan overheard her asking Vanessa whether it was safe to mail a birthday card to Grandma Helen now. According to Ethan, the room went strangely silent afterward. "What do you mean safe?" he asked. Lily shrugged nervously. "Mom said Grandma gets too attached, and it makes people stressed." Ethan apparently laughed at first, thinking it was a misunderstanding. But then Noah added casually from the living room, "Mom says Grandma cries to make people feel guilty." Children repeat stories without understanding the damage buried inside them. Vanessa reportedly became defensive almost immediately. She explained she had only been trying to protect healthy emotional boundaries. The same phrases again. Boundaries. Emotional stress. Healthy space. But for the first time, Ethan started hearing something underneath those polished explanations. Not concern. Contempt. Over the next several days, little things kept bothering him. Old memories resurfacing differently now that he looked at them from another angle. Vanessa always insisting on handling communication with me herself. Birthday invitations somehow getting lost. Gifts returned without explanation. Missed calls Ethan never actually saw because Vanessa usually controlled the shared family calendar and home accounts. One night after Vanessa fell asleep, Ethan searched through archived email folders looking for a document from work and accidentally discovered dozens of unread messages from me automatically sorted into muted folders. Harmless things mostly. Photos of Christmas cookies. Messages asking how Noah's flu symptoms were improving. One email simply saying, "Thinking about you today. Drive safely in the snow." None of them dramatic. None manipulative. Just small, ordinary attempts from a mother trying not to disappear completely. Ethan sat alone in the glow of his laptop screen while years of assumptions slowly began rearranging themselves inside his mind. But by then I was already packing my dishes into newspaper and labeling boxes for Maine. I did not know any of this yet. I only knew that each item removed from the house seemed to take another piece of sadness with it. And for the first time in a very long while, the silence inside my home no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. By the time April arrived, most of my life fit inside 23 cardboard boxes labeled carefully with black marker. Kitchen, books, winter clothes, Walter's things. I moved through the house slowly during those final weeks, touching walls absent-mindedly, as though saying goodbye to a person instead of a place. The maple tree Walter and I planted decades earlier had finally begun showing tiny red buds along its branches. Spring was arriving whether I felt ready for it or not. My flight to Maine left on a gray Thursday morning just before sunrise. Susan drove me to Denver International Airport because she insisted no woman should begin a new chapter alone, carrying 2 heavy suitcases. We hugged beside the departure terminal while cold wind whipped across the drop-off lane. "You are braver than you think," she told me before driving away. I stood there for a moment watching travelers hurry past with rolling luggage and coffee cups balanced in tired hands. Nobody looking at me knew I had spent the last several months quietly dismantling an entire life. The flight itself felt strangely peaceful. Somewhere over the Midwest, clouds stretched endlessly outside the airplane window like fresh snowfields beneath pale morning sunlight. I rested my forehead lightly against the glass and realized my chest no longer carried that constant tightness I had lived with for years. There was sadness still, of course. Grief does not disappear simply because you leave a place behind. But for the first time in a very long while, there was space beside the sadness too. Space to breathe. Space to exist without constantly wondering whether my love had become inconvenient to somebody else. Camden greeted me with cold ocean air and the sharp scent of salt water drifting through narrow streets lined with weathered storefronts. The town looked exactly like the photographs online. Small fishing boats rocking gently in the harbor. White church steeples rising above clusters of old brick buildings. Tiny cafes glowing warmly against rainy gray afternoons. My cottage sat near the edge of town along a quiet road overlooking the water. Blue shutters. Small stone pathway. Wind chimes hanging near the porch. Inside, everything smelled faintly of cedar and sea air. That first evening I unpacked only the essentials. A few sweaters. Toiletries. Walter's framed photograph beside the bed. Then I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat on the porch listening to distant waves crashing against the rocks below while gulls circled overhead crying into the wind. It struck me then how long it had been since I sat anywhere without waiting for my phone to ring. Back in Colorado, Ethan's world had finally begun unraveling in ways he could no longer ignore. After discovering those archived emails, he started asking questions Vanessa clearly did not expect. Why had my Valentine cards been returned? Why were my messages filtered automatically? Why did the children believe I was emotionally dangerous? According to Ethan later, every conversation ended the same way. Vanessa accusing him of minimizing her feelings. Vanessa insisting she had only tried protecting their family dynamic. Vanessa crying whenever he pressed too hard for answers. But once doubt enters a person's mind, it changes the shape of everything afterward. Ethan began noticing details he had ignored for years. The way Vanessa answered my texts before he even saw them. The way invitations somehow disappeared before reaching me. The way conversations about me always left him feeling vaguely irritated without fully understanding why. One night Lily quietly admitted she had stopped calling me because Vanessa often sighed afterward and said things like, "Grandma gets too emotionally dependent when people encourage her." Ethan reportedly sat awake until nearly dawn after hearing that. Meanwhile, my own days in Camden settled into gentle routines. Mornings began with coffee on. The porch wrapped in thick sweaters while fog rolled slowly across the harbor. I started volunteering twice a week at the little bookstore downtown after the owner, a silver-haired widow named Margaret, mentioned needing extra help organizing donations. The shop smelled like old paper and cinnamon tea. Tourists wandered through during afternoons asking for local history books, while rain tapped softly against the windows. Nobody there knew anything about my family. To them, I was simply Helen, the quiet woman from Colorado who recommended mystery novels and always straightened crooked shelves before leaving. There was something deeply comforting about being seen without old expectations attached to you. About a month after arriving, I walked back to the cottage one chilly evening carrying a paper bag filled with blueberry muffins from the bakery near Main Street. The harbor glowed silver beneath sunset clouds, while fishing boats bobbed gently against wooden docks. My phone buzzed inside my coat pocket just as I reached the front gate. I almost ignored it. Old habits still lingered. But something made me stop. Ethan's name filled the screen for the first time in nearly 4 months. My hand stayed perfectly still while the phone continued vibrating softly against my palm. Then another message appeared beneath the first. "Mom, I think I made a terrible mistake." I stared at the words while cold ocean wind moved through the trees around me. Somewhere nearby, a buoy bell echoed faintly across the darkening water. For a long moment, I simply stood there listening to the sound, because the strange thing was this. Months earlier, that message would have shattered me completely. Now it mostly made me sad for him. I did not answer Ethan's message that night. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted him to suffer. I simply no longer felt the same desperate urgency to fix things immediately. That was new for me. For most of my life, whenever someone I loved pulled away, I chased after them carrying apologies I did not owe. But standing there beside the gate with cold Atlantic wind moving through my hair, I realized exhaustion had finally replaced desperation. I walked inside the cottage, placed the blueberry muffins on the kitchen counter, and set my phone face down beside the sink. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the windows while harbor fog rolled across the dark water beyond town. I made tea and sat quietly in the armchair near the fireplace listening to the storm settle over Camden. Ethan sent 3 more messages before midnight. Please talk to me. I did not know everything. I should have protected you. The words hurt in a different way than the silence had, because part of me had waited years to hear them. Yet another part understood something painful too. Apologies arrive differently once your life no longer revolves around receiving them. The next morning, I walked down to the harbor before the bookstore opened. Fishing boats drifted slowly through pale gray fog while gulls circled overhead, crying sharply into the wind. The little coffee shop near Main Street had already opened its doors, filling the cold morning air with the smell of cinnamon and roasted beans. Camden was beginning another ordinary day, completely unaware that somewhere in Colorado my son was finally seeing the truth about his own family clearly. Around noon my phone rang again while I was reorganizing travel books inside the bookstore. This time I answered. For several seconds neither of us spoke. I could hear Ethan breathing softly through the line like he was trying to steady himself. "Mom," he finally whispered. His voice sounded older somehow, frayed around the edges. I leaned lightly against the bookshelf beside me. "Hello, Ethan." Silence again. Then quietly. "I have been trying to reach you for weeks." "You asked for space," I replied calmly. I did not say it cruelly, just honestly. He let out a shaky breath after that. I did not understand what was happening. Through the front windows, I watched rainwater slide slowly down the glass while tourists hurried along sidewalks carrying umbrellas. Somewhere near the back of the store, Margaret laughed softly at something a customer said. Ordinary life continuing while mine shifted once again. Ethan started talking quickly then, words tumbling over each other. He explained the filtered emails, the return cards, the things the children had been told. How every concern about me somehow became twisted into proof that I was emotionally unstable. "I feel sick thinking about it now," he admitted quietly. "You were never the problem." I closed my eyes briefly hearing that sentence because deep down, I think every abandoned mother wonders eventually whether love itself made her difficult to keep. "No," I said softly. "I was not." Another silence settled between us. Heavy this time, full of years neither of us could get back. Finally, Ethan spoke again. "Can I come see you?" The question lingered in the air between us while rain tapped steadily against the windows. Months earlier I would have answered immediately. I would have rearranged my entire life around making reconciliation easier for him. But something inside me had changed in Maine. Peace changes people. So does finally understanding your own worth after years of shrinking yourself to remain welcome in someone else's life. "Not right now," I said gently. Ethan sounded stunned. "Mom, I love you," I interrupted softly. "I will probably always love you. But I spent too long teaching myself that being needed was the same thing as being valued. I cannot go back to that anymore." He started crying quietly then. Not dramatic sobbing. Just the exhausted sound of someone realizing too late how much damage can happen while you stand still believing someone else's version of reality. "I am so sorry," he whispered. I looked around the bookstore while he cried softly on the other end of the line. Shelves filled with old stories. Rain against the windows. The scent of coffee drifting from the break room. A peaceful little life I never would have found if I had continued begging for scraps of affection back in Colorado. "I know," I told him finally. "And I think you mean it." We spoke for a little while longer after that. About the children. About Walter. About nothing important and everything important all at once. Before hanging up, Ethan asked if he could call again someday. I looked out toward the harbor where fog drifted slowly between fishing boats disappearing into the distance. "Maybe," I said. Honestly, after work I walked home beneath clearing skies while golden evening light spread softly across the water. People smiled passing me on the sidewalks. Someone played guitar outside a seafood restaurant near the docks. The town glowed warmly against the fading storm. Back at the cottage, I placed a fresh postcard onto the kitchen table beside a pen. Later that night, I wrote only one sentence before sealing it inside an envelope addressed to Colorado. I hope one day you learn that love should never require someone to disappear in order to deserve peace. Then I turned off the lights and listened to the ocean outside my windows, realizing the silence they once gave me had finally become the peace I should have chosen for myself years ago.